Exocytosis is cell puking. Seriously. This is when a cell decides to remove contents in bulk. The first thing they do is they create a secretory vesicle like this, which is kind of like collecting all the garbage in a garbage bag, getting ready to take it out. I just spelled that wrong. Never mind, you can spell it however you want. But then the cell, what it does is it uses proteins that are on the vesicle to bind with a certain area with proteins on the cell membrane. Once that binding is done with those leaking proteins, then a pore to the outside, which you can see it's getting started right here, and here is the pore, the fusion pore that is huge. Then the pore to the outside can spill all of the contents of the vesicle into the interstitial fluids. Endocytosis is cell eating. That makes sense, right? So this type of bulk transport allows a cell to take in large amounts of substances. In your tissues, there are cells called phagocytes, and this prefix, phago, means to eat. These phagocytes, they roam around your tissues, kind of like eating anything that they don't recognize, which I imagine that's kind of like Pac-Man. But sometimes these cells, they can also be called macrophages, depending on their origin. There are also cells that drink the exocytosis fluid, and those cells are called pinocytes. And that's because they like to drink Pinot Noir wine. Kidding. The cells that usually drink interstitial fluids are called dendritic cells. Both pinocytes and phagocytes. They will present their findings to leukocytes, or white blood cells that are in lymph nodes. These white blood cells are then able to mount an immune response if needed. So phagocytes and pinocytes are kind of like your first line of defense. Active transport is essentially the opposite of diffusion and osmosis. Instead of moving a gradient to a homogeneous mixture, active transport creates a gradient. So active transport is movement against the grain, or against the concentration gradient, or moving a molecule from a place of low concentration to a place of, I don't know why I just made that an E, to a place of high concentration. This requires energy in the form of ATP. I sometimes feel as though my life is like moving against the concentration gradient and requiring massive amounts of energy from me. Anybody feel the same way? I have a picture here, well, actually I have 6 pictures here, of an interesting little protein called the sodium-potassium pump. It uses ATP and active transport to maintain the sodium-potassium gradients in your cells. Sodium is in high concentrations outside your cells, and potassium is in high concentration inside your cells. Unfortunately, because of these gradients, the ions will leak out of and into the cells, trying to make a homogeneous mixture. The pump, it basically puts the ions back into their correct location. So the ions leak, the pump puts them back. Let's label these pictures here to tell a story. What we have is a cell, a specific part of a cell. Let me draw a cell for you. Here's a cell. And we're looking at a specific part of a cell with the cell membrane and the sodium and potassium pump. Let's put some sodium cations on the outside of this cell, and let's put not as many in the cytosol. So we've made a gradient, And what we see is that these cations, they will leak into the cell, and the sodium-potassium pump will load up 3 sodium cations and actively transport them against the gradient back into the interstitial fluids. The bottom pictures here also tell a story, but not left to right, right to left. Potassium is in high concentration inside your cells in the cytosol and is in not as much concentration in the outside or interstitial fluids. And that means that these potassium cations leak out of the cell. And although we have and then the sodium potassium pump, what it does is it loads up 2 potassium cations and it transports them back into the inside of the cell, back to where they're supposed to be. And although we have 6 different pictures here, the pump does all of this in one fell swoop. It's one action, and the 5 ions move at the same time. But you can see from this picture that when the pump uses one ATP molecule, it moves 3 sodium cations per every 2 potassium cations. Why the disproportion? Because the sodium cations, they leak a lot faster than the potassium cations. They actually leak as every 3 sodium cations leak into the cell, 2 potassium cations leak out. And so the pump deals with that disproportion and also puts them back in that proportion.